The notes tonight cover actually writing and creating our Constitution. So once the Articles of Confederation were deemed to be a failure, we needed to figure out, okay, well what are we going to do? We initially said, let's have a meeting to revise the Articles of Confederation, and then backtracked on that and decided that actually it would be smarter to just simply scrap the Articles and start fresh, create a new government from scratch. So the notes today are going to cover two parts. One, creating the Congress, and two, creating the presidency. We're going to talk about three compromises that had to happen in order for us to move forward with this new form of government. So the Constitutional Convention consisted of 55 delegates from 12 states. Rhode Island chose not to participate. These were all white men. Most of them were pretty wealthy, property owners. So they weren't exactly a good representation of the total population, right? These decisions were being made by wealthy white men, landowners. A couple ideas that we have discussed that influence them. Separation of powers, which means setting up three different branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. And checks and balances. So these founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, gave each branch the ability to check or block the other branches to make sure that no branch got too powerful. So one big issue that the creators of the Constitution had to address was, how would seats in the new Congress be given out? The delegates from Virginia showed up with a plan. They said, all right, let's have two different houses of Congress, or chambers of Congress, and in both of them we'll give out seats based on population. That would give states with a lot of people more votes than states with only a few people. And as you can imagine, states that had big populations really liked this plan. It would give them more power. As you can probably also imagine, small states weren't crazy about it. They rallied around what was called the New Jersey Plan, which said, no, let's have one house or chamber of Congress and give each state the same number of seats, since every state is independent and equal. Small states like this plan, big states weren't crazy about it. This issue almost tore apart the Constitutional Convention. You had people who were threatening to leave until the Great Compromise. So the solution was the Great Compromise. And it said, there's going to be two houses of Congress, two chambers. One of them will be called the House of Representatives. And in the House, we'll give out seats based on population. So that made the big states happy. The Senate would have equal representation. 2 senators for every state, no matter how many people live there. And that made the small states happy. So neither side got everything they wanted, but both sides got a little bit of what they wanted. A second important issue was whether or not slaves should be counted in the population of a state when determining how many seats they get. States that had a lot of slaves would get more seats if they were counted. So you had slave states saying, we should count slaves. That will give us more people and it will give us more power. States without slaves up north said, well, hang on a minute, you guys treat slaves like property. They're not free, you don't treat them like people, and so they shouldn't be counted. The solution that they came up with at the Constitutional Convention was called the 3/5 Compromise. In this compromise, slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person. And that total would be added to the state's population and would count for representation and for taxation. The next area we'll talk about is creating the presidency. So we've talked about one of the biggest issues with the Articles of Confederation was that there was no executive, there was no president, there was nobody to enforce the laws and make the states obey Congress. But a lot of people were worried that a president that was too powerful would be like a king, right? And we had just gotten rid of a king. We didn't want a really strong president who would be too powerful. So in thinking about how to create this position of president, some of the things that the delegates discussed were how long should the president serve? Could he be reelected or should he only serve one term? Should there only be one president or should there be a committee of maybe 2 or 3 people to take that job? They also debated who would pick the president. Would the people pick the president or would the state governments pick the president? Would Congress choose the president? So there were a lot of question marks and a lot of debate over how to pick the president. What we settled on was to have one president who would serve for 4 years and who could be reelected. So one president would serve for 4 years. The president could be reelected if the people chose to do so. And they decided that the people would pick the president, but not directly, that they would do it through an indirect method called the Electoral College. And as we look a little bit more closely at the Constitution, we'll talk about how the Electoral College works. But what you need to know is that the American people do not directly choose the president. They choose the president through a group called the Electoral College.